A little nervous about today's episode, Mike,
Yeah, why's that?
because these things are so short and there are so many different like little tidbits that I have no idea how we're going to cover today's book.
It will be interesting. It will be even more interesting trying to figure out where the chapters should be.
Yes.
But guess that's my problem or Toby's problem.
Good luck, Toby. This episode is going to be your test. We'll see how well you do with a ridiculous episode.
Yeah.
But before we get there, I was looking through our action item list from last episode and noticed there were none, and remembered that, yep, there were none. And that means we have no real follow-up that I can recall. So unless you have something that you want to go over before we jump in here.
I actually have a couple of things I would love to mention if we have the space.
Yeah, we do. Absolutely.
All right. So the first thing is that September is National Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, and the relay team, which I am a part of, you are adjacent to,
Correct,
is raising funds for St. Jude Children's Hospital. And this is a very worthwhile cause. I found out some new stuff from this campaign where the most common form of childhood cancer ends up costing over $200,000 on average. And what makes St. Jude amazing is that none of the families of the kids that are treated there have to pay a dime. So the treatment is free, the travel is free, the food, the accommodations, everything. St. Jude just takes care of it, which makes sense when you think about it from the family's perspective. You would really appreciate that, right? Because your kid is dying. You want to keep them alive. Like, that's your whole focus. Who cares how much it costs? But in the back of your mind, you're thinking about all those bills that are going to come due, and with St. Jude, none of that pressure is there. They have increased the survival rate for childhood cancer from 20% to 80% in the time that they've been open. And they're a research hospital, so they share everything that they discover with everybody else. It's like open source childhood cancer prevention, which is pretty incredible.
it's like all the things, like everything you could possibly want out of that's them.
Yeah, it's really an incredible place, and it means a lot to me because Stephen Hackett, one of the co-founders of the Relay Network, who I have gotten to know over the last several years, he's had to go through this with his son Josiah. I've got a link, which I'll put in the show notes, to a post that he wrote 2 years after they found out about Josiah's about his diagnosis, and like I teared up reading that, even though I wasn't there and I didn't have to go through it. Like, just having to think about that stuff, like, it hurts. And Josiah's doing great now, and it's really cool to see. He's now classified as a cancer survivor, and 80% of the cost to keep St. Jude running comes from fundraising efforts like this. So if you've got $1,000, if you've got a single dollar, it doesn't matter. I would just ask that you consider donating something. I've done it every single year. My wife and I are going to do it again. And if you want to get involved, you can go to stjude.org/relay. As part of the fundraising for this, as we record this, is yet to have happened. If you're listening to this the day it gets recorded, make sure you're paying attention to the podcast-a-thon. It's happening on September 17th. They'll probably have a video of it after the fact. But they are again doing the game show stuff with Jason Snell, and I got to participate in Relay FM host Balderdash.
Nice.
I did not do very well, but it was a lot of fun.
Spoiler alert. Though I suppose this will be out after it's done.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
There you go.
So check that out. The podcast-a-thon is like a big, long podcast live stream that Stephen and Mike do, and they have a bunch of other people helping out with it. So I was fortunate that I got to participate this time. And it was a lot of fun. And that's going to be broken into a couple different segments throughout the podcast-a-thon. So check that out. One other non-serious and way more fun thing I have to talk to you about, Joe Bulig. Do you know what this is?
It's a key switch. Are these holy pandas? What are these? It doesn't look like a panda.
No, this is the Zelios V2.
Okay.
And I have a box of them right over here.
Okay.
Which
and you have a hot swappable keyboard.
Well, yes, true. But
okay.
there is another keyboard on the way.
Of course. Of course. And what is it?
It's a Keychron Q1.
Q1.
So this is the new one that they came out with. It's the same size as the K2. So the one MKBHD made popular. Same layout.
Yep.
Got the full function rows at the top, but doesn't have all the stuff on the side. It is also gasket mounted and programmable. So basically all the fancy stuff that you would get in like the GMMK Pro.
Yep.
But at $150 less.
Nice.
So yeah, I got the bare bones kit for as a birthday gift. My wife knows not to get me anything without talking to me, I guess, which I'm not sure I feel great about that. But she's like, so what do you want for your birthday? I'm like, well, there is this one thing I've been keeping an eye on. She's like, oh, you want the keyboard?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes. In fact, I would.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, the keyboard is yet to ship. But I've seen some different reviews and stuff. And basically this is like next level Keychron stuff. It's debatable whether even I will notice the difference with this new keyboard, but
yeah,
we're going to give it a shot.
I've learned that some of these keyboards, unless you are borderline making a living off of feeling nuances in keyboards, you're probably not going to notice the difference. Like, that's just kind of what I've learned. Like, unless you do this all the time and pay super close attention to it, you're probably not going to catch it on a large number of these. So
yeah,
I get it. Now, I don't know. I think my next keyboard is probably a custom build, but that's what we call expensive.
See, I'm resisting that with every fiber of my being, and I'm hoping I don't end up in that place. I've already gone down that route with Bluetooth noise-canceling headphones, where I tried like 8 different kinds before I finally just bit the bullet and bought the QC35s, which were the big deal when they came out. Now there's a bunch of other really great options.
Yeah.
But at the time, you would always, there was that one and then everything else. And I tried literally everything else.
Yep, I hear you.
These Zelios, though,
Keyboards.
These are nice. I like the bump is more at the top, and it feels a little bit more rounded than the Holy Pandas.
They're tactile, right? They're not linears.
They are tactile.
Well, if they've got a bump, then yes.
Correct. But they're not clicky. And they're way better than the Gateron Browns that ship with the Keychron stuff.
Yeah, that's what mine has. The one sitting in front of me. Gateron Browns are my dailies right now. I say that, and I've got a keyboard. I don't even know where it's at now. It's probably in a storage unit somewhere that has the MX, the Cherry Browns in it. So that one has not been used in quite some time. But I am slowly realizing that despite everybody going to 60% keyboards and 80% keyboards, the one I have in front of me is a 10 keyless, and I don't like it. I want my 10 key back. So I think I will probably forever and always be buying full-size keyboards, which is a monster on the desk.
Exactly.
But for whatever reason, that keypad is something I tend to want regularly. Don't know what that is.
Well, the keypad is nice.
Weird.
And you can do all sorts of cool automation stuff with that keypad. But yeah, it definitely takes up a ton of room on the desk. So I don't think I could make it fit. My desk is pretty cluttered.
Yeah. You know what I probably should do? I've got this Stream Deck in front of me. I could probably make a page for a keypad and then use it for that.
There you go.
I don't know. It would work, I think. So anyway, today's book has it. Well, let me back up. Today's book is Daily Rituals by Mason Currey. And this book is basically a quick snapshot of great artists from like the last, I would say probably the last 400, sometimes 500 years or so. Artists meaning painters, writers, philosophers, in some case, poets, and the like. And what were their daily rituals? What were their routines? What were the things, their idiosyncrasies and such? And there are a lot in here. I didn't count them. Do you know how many are covered in this book? It's got to be over 100, would be my assumption, but I don't know what that number is. There's a lot of artists covered in this book, and I had the great opportunity to make an attempt to try to figure out how to go through all of this process and determine what this was going to look like what this whole episode was going to look like. So going through this, I was trying to determine, like, how are we going to go through this whole process, this whole book? It's like, there's no way we're going to be able to cover every single artist in this book. So I've got 2 sections here because I didn't want 3. And I have a bank of, like, specific people for us to jump through. And in most of those cases, I have 1, 2, in some cases 3 little points about that person and what it was that they did or what their life was like that we could talk about. But then I also have a bank of, like, themes that I was starting to notice as I went through this. That's probably where I think we'll spend a little more time. I feel like walking through this specific artist is probably going to be somewhat quick, but I don't know. Some of these are like 1 paragraph long. Some of these are 2 or 3 pages long, but they're usually not beyond that. They're fairly short sections. Anyway, super interesting. I was fascinated by a lot of these rituals. And I think this was a Gap book of yours a while back, right? How long's that been since you did this for a Gap book?
It was, I don't remember exactly. If I had to guess, probably about 8 to 10 months. But just like when I read it as a Gap book, I started to do my mind map and then realized there was no way I was going to be able to do that for this. So sorry, team. No
Okay.
mind node file for this one because I literally would have rewritten the entire book.
Yeah, it's intense.
It would have been at least 85% of the volume of this book because some of the descriptions are very, very short. Most of them, I would argue, there's not a whole lot of fluff in this one.
Sure. Yeah. No, it's so true because I was putting together, like, I've got a note file where I was writing things down about each person so that I could try to take that and then somehow find themes across each of these people, and realized that was going to become an enormous file, and it was taking me longer to build the file than it was to read the book by a significant margin. And this is the absolute wrong time in Joe's life for that to happen. So was not going to get through all of that. I think it was, what was it, mid-late? Yeah, it was mid last week whenever I was probably about a third of the way through the book and going through that process and thought, I'm not going to get anywhere close to done in time for us to record this. And then I ended up needing to put this off. We were going to record this past Friday and needed to put it off and barely got it done. I finished it this morning. I'll say that. So super fun.
Just like some of these people, by the way, you work better with a deadline, it seems.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. 100%. So let's just jump in with Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. I figured this would be a good place to start. And then I'm just kind of walking through the book itself, but I did not realize that Mozart was such a chaotic person. Like, I don't know why that is, but for some reason in my head, Mozart was someone who was very organized, very ritualized, and very on top of things. And yet he was just pure chaos, And when I say that, I basically, he ends up marrying someone who his wife's parents did not approve of him at all. And it was just a rough go being able to get married. And what did he even say here? He cannot rely on being able to compose in the evening owing to the concerts which are taking place. So because he was doing all the concerts and stuff, so he couldn't compose, but then he's staying up late in order to compose. Anyway, Mozart.
Yeah, that was the interesting thing about this one the first time I read it, and I was reminded of it when I read it again, was Mozart is one of those people that you would think of, this guy was brilliant. Just look at, and maybe that's my perspective because I grew up playing classical violin. So I have played a lot of Mozart pieces. Not well, because they are very technical. This guy was a genius. And you would think, from my perspective, I always thought he must have just been completely devoted to composing. But he totally composing was a side hustle for him. He was trying to pay the bills with all the other stuff. And I remember first time I read it kind of being blown away that this was essentially a side project for him. And you think when you realize that, how much more would he have been able to contribute to the world had he been able to be fully focused on it. But then also, I think maybe that's the wrong perspective to have. Maybe the perspective to take away from that is, well, if he could do all of this stuff on the side, then it's not too late for me either.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because I know how many of us have side hustles, right? And we tend to think that you can only spend so much time on them, and so many of the productivity people like us will tell you that things like sleep and mindfulness and such are really important, and you need to make those a regular routine. And yet you've got, and we'll talk about this, folks here who do their best work after their day job, after the kids are in bed, and then get up early the next morning and go to work. Like, it's just a thing that continues to come up. Whether you think that's the right way to do it or not is totally up to you, but that's just the way that some of these people did it. And Mozart was one of those. He had all of his concerts and, you know, his house parties and things he needed to do in order to get the income he needed to keep doing what he was doing. And then sometime had to compose the works that were actually driving all of the concerts and the house parties and such. So, yes, very, very difficult to pull off. Let's go. I really want to talk about Kierkegaard. I really, really, really want to talk about Kierkegaard. So Soren Kierkegaard, if I could get that out of my mouth, had some very strange coffee habits. Do you approve of his coffee habits? I'm going to read this because I cannot do this justice if I summarize it, and it will be faster if I just read it. Okay? You ready for this? Kierkegaard had his own quite peculiar way of having coffee. Delightedly, he seized hold of the bag containing the sugar and poured sugar into the coffee cup until it was piled up above the rim. Next came the incredibly strong black coffee, which slowly dissolved the white pyramid. The process was scarcely finished before the syrupy stimulant disappeared into the magister's stomach, where it mingled with the sherry to produce additional energy that percolated up into his seething and bubbling brain, which in any case had already been so productive all day that in the half-light, Levin, which was his cohort, could still notice the tingling and throbbing in the overworked fingers when they grasped the slender handle of the cup. Now, he also had sherry before he had his coffee, if you didn't catch that particular part there. But the concept of filling a coffee cup with sugar and then pouring your coffee into it, I'm not sure it qualifies as coffee anymore.
Disgusting. No, I do not approve.
I will forever see Kierkegaard's name tainted because of this. So the number of times that I see his name with quotes, and then yes, I'm just not going to be able to see him the same way. It's like, I don't trust your coffee habits. I'm not sure I trust you anymore.
Yeah, that's the kind of detail that is really fascinating with some of these stories. I feel towards the end of the book, you start to lose some of that, and it kind of morphs into this person got up at this time and went to bed at that time. In the middle of the day, they took a nap.
Yes.
But I wish there were more ridiculous stories like this sprinkled throughout.
And I mean, there are some, but I mean, they're not. I feel like he gave us a lot more of those at the beginning.
Yeah, which makes sense. That's what I would do if I was working with a limited number of interesting routines.
Yes.
The very next one is one that I liked. That is Benjamin Franklin. Do you know why I liked Benjamin Franklin?
Benjamin Franklin had his time-blocked day.
Exactly.
That's kind of the classic that people have from him. Yes.
Yeah, they have a picture of his daily routine from an autobiography. I'm assuming this is not his actual time-blocked plan from his own typewriter, but I thought that was
impressive,
cool.
Though.
Yeah. I do like that, though. I had seen that picture before. I don't know exactly where it was, but I had seen that when I had heard about time blocking and being tied to Benjamin Franklin's routine. But I felt like that was a really cool detail, and I'm glad that Mason Currey put that in the book.
Yeah, there are not a lot of pictures in the book, but there are some of the artists in most cases. I think this is one of the few where it's a picture of the routine itself laid out. I've seen this before. I think it's from Brett McKay over at Art of Manliness. I know he's got a thing for Benjamin Franklin and has a whole like notebook of sorts, I think, it's devoted to Franklin. And I think this is in it. So I'm not certain on that, so don't quote me on that piece, but I think that's where I've seen it before.
Sure. The other thing with Benjamin Franklin, which this is where he loses me, is he's got his 12 virtues and he focused on one a month. And the thought was by the end of the year, then he'd be good.
Yep.
It's a little bit more complicated than that. He didn't say it exactly that way, but basically he did. There was an element of that, like I'm going to focus on this and I'm going to get it good, and then I'm going to focus on the next one. And so I don't think he ever thought he was going to like be completely virtuous, achieved maximum virtuosity, but that is kind of implied with the strategy as outlined in this book. Like, as soon as I heard that, well, that's not quite how that works, but okay.
He also had his air baths, which was weird to me, like getting up early and sitting in his chamber without any clothes on for a while. Like,
he's a different kind of dude.
That's strange. That's some of those strange things that are in here. Speaking of strange, Sigmund Freud. I don't know if I need to say much more about Freud, but he two things that were kind of strange to me. I didn't know he was basically a chain-smoking cigar man. I did not know that, but he had a ton, like he was basically on a cigar all day, every day. Freud had a barber come to his house every single day to trim his beard. He had a barber that would do house calls, and he came and trimmed his beard every single day. That's all. Just wanted to point that out.
Yeah.
Freud.
No one has to come trim my beard, so I can't relate to the Freud with that.
I mean, I would appreciate it if somebody did it for me, but honestly, it's quick, so I'll do it. It's fine. Oh, I suppose that was probably before like the electric trimmers and such. Who knows?
Yeah.
Carl Jung. We're moving forward here. I'm just gonna kind of keep moving because I feel like the themes will be kind of the fun part. But Carl Jung has a quote that I thought was interesting because he was one of these workaholic peoples. That's a fairly common theme through this. Is a lot of these artists ran themselves ragged. But Carl Jung had a quote in here. I've realized somebody who's tired and needs a rest and goes on working all the same is a fool. I thought that was, I mean, it makes sense whenever you hear it, but at the same time, if you read this short story about Carl Jung, you realize that the man was working ridiculous hours and did things even outside of his working hours. Built a primitive house such that he had to go down and grab buckets of water and boil his water. And keep in mind, this is in the mid-1900s, like 1950, 1960. Like, this isn't 1600s. But he still would take care of things as they were centuries before the time when he built this house. And yet, despite all of that, he was still willing to take the breaks and try to make sure that he got the rest that he needed. Thus, Carl Jung. And he was up by 7 a.m. every morning, too, on top of that. So he was not a night owl.
True. He wasn't up super early like some of the other people. 7 a.m. at least doesn't seem super early to me. But so does this primitive lifestyle have any appeal to you, Joe Buelig?
Kind of, sort of, maybe.
I figured it might.
So partially because like I just bought a house that's got some kind of primitive stuff to it. I'm yet to determine what my internet situation is going to be. That's here in a couple weeks when I'll nail that down. But
oh boy,
yeah, we'll see what I land on with that. The highest internet speed I've been quoted that's hardlined is a 1 meg connection. So,
oof.
That's after calling 12 different companies. So, yeah, it'll be fast internet for sure.
So we're not recording Bookworm from home.
No, unless it's through a phone call, it won't happen from there. I will not be live streaming from that place, most likely. So, anyway, yes, I have some primitive tendencies. I've been cutting lumber or cutting up, fallen trees and stuff, and I need to get an axe at this point because I got to cut stuff up for firewood and stuff, and my wife is super into having chickens next year, so yeah, there's a lot of that happening, I guess. So when I was reading this, I was like, oh, that sounds really nice, and it's like, yep, that would terrify a lot of people. I'm very aware of that.
There's a lot of these routines that would terrify a lot of people. A lot of like optimizing everything for the act of creating and then going to bed immediately afterwards.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who don't fit that mold too, which is kind of the
Right.
interesting thing about the book in general. There's so many different styles here, but
Yeah, and you were talking about 7 a.m. not being super early. If you want somebody who is up super early, let's go to Hemingway. And Hemingway was up by 5:30. Though I suppose I wouldn't count as super, super early. There were some in here that were up by 4 a.m. every day, and that was their routine. But Hemingway was up by 5:30. He's kind of the classic methodical, ritualized, structured writer, and had some tracking that he did for his word counts so that he could figure out if he was not, like, he wanted to make sure he wasn't fooling himself and thinking he was writing a lot more than he actually was. But yes, he was up early, and even if he had been up late drinking the night before, he was still up early. And who was it? His son Gregory said that he always looked great even if he had been up drinking the night before. It seemed like he was immune to hangovers, was what his son said. But yes, he was one of these guys who had a super regular process, and he did not sharpen 22 pencils, Mike, before he started writing.
I did catch that detail.
Yep. As much as people like, and I've seen that one out there, but yeah, apparently that's a myth.
All right. What's interesting about this was the word count section to me, that he's keeping track of that stuff by hand.
Yeah, think about that. He would have counted each word manually.
Yep.
Written it
Just
down.
to prove to himself that he was actually doing the work that he thought he was doing. And there's so many people who refuse to even look at their screen time stats when I say, you spend more time in social media than you think you do. We need more Hemingways.
Yeah, another one who was super structured was B.F. Skinner, as you would expect. If you know Skinner, he's the behavioral psychologist. And it totally got me whenever he was saying he would ring a bell at different times. Like, he was one that would be like, he would ding a bell at different times and have the buzzers go off whenever he had different transitions he needed to go through and stuff, which is exactly what you would expect from somebody who's big into the behavior psychology side of things. And yet he was always reliable as a result of that. So anyway, B.F. Skinner, just what you would expect from him.
Yeah, another one that I liked, I have a couple just like specific quotes here, not necessarily the routines that were interesting, but Chuck Close said, inspiration is for amateurs. The rest of us show up and get to work. You can definitely see that theme throughout here with a bunch of the different routines. And that quote, by the way, I have heard different forms of that quote over the years, and I feel like it's never attributed to Chuck Close, which got me thinking as I saw these pop up again and again in like the interview snippets that Mason Currey would put in these interviews. It's like, these people were all ripping each other off and claiming these ideas as their own.
Totally doing it.
They were all stealing like an artist.
Yes, 100%. That's what people do. It's like, if somebody else is doing it, claim it as your own and pass it off. But in today's world, you have to keep that in mind. In a lot of these cases, they could do that and people thought it was their idea because things like the internet and widespread media wasn't a thing. So you didn't know what the source of the idea was and you had no way to trace it. Nowadays you do. So you could rip people off before. It's a little more difficult to do that without giving the attribution today.
Yeah, true.
I don't know how valid that is, but anyway, Charles Dickens, again, was extremely routine and methodical. I don't know if I just am drawn to that, and that's why I picked these people out, because there were definitely folks that were not at all, which we'll get to right after this. But the one that was interesting to me about Dickens, because obviously Dickens wrote a lot, but he had a very specific arrangement that he wanted his desk to be in, and was like a minute by minute schedule type of person. And again, like what you were saying, like that's one of these themes that I think we'll get to here in a bit, but it's one where, like, if you have set times, like you're going to work, it's almost like what Skinner's doing with having those triggered moments, and it sets your brain into that mode. Thus, it makes it easier to get into the mindset that you're after, to do the writing. It seems like most of these were writers. I don't know if it was just the ones that I was drawn to or not, but it seems like a lot of folks were writers.
I don't know. I didn't do a count. I assume there's a fairly healthy balance of a lot of different things. On the cover, he talks about writers, composers, painters, choreographers, playwrights, poets, philosophers, sculptors, filmmakers, and scientists on how they create. But yeah, I think the writer ones stood out the most to me too, maybe just because those are the ones that have the most control over what and where they work. I mean, you don't need a ton of gear and you don't need a fancy space in order to write. There are people who just sat on their bed and they were prolific writers.
Right.
So I think that kind of appeals to me. Another thing, kind of contrasting the very rigid, this is the schedule sort of thing, is Woody Allen. I like this quote. Woody Allen said, "Any momentary change stimulates a fresh burst of mental energy." And for me, I've noticed that back in the day, I used to travel between coffee shop and library and co-working space, and I'd basically show up, create for like an hour and a half, and then when I hit a wall, I'd get in the car and go somewhere else. And I never really understood why. I never had any like quantifiable data, like this is actually helping me with the creative process. And then Woody Allen said that, and I was like, that's it. That's what I've been doing.
Thanks, Woody.
Yeah. When I read that again, though, I realized I kind of missed that. I've made a lot of changes to my home office, and this is a great space to work from. But it's at home, and I have 5 kids who are homeschooled, and I recognize that maybe this isn't the best place for me to be all day, every day. So I actually joined a co-working space.
Nice.
A different one in Appleton, which is pretty cool. It's decent. I mean, it's not like super fancy or anything like that, but I don't need it to be. I recognized a different place to go to do writing. It's kind of noisy. I'm not going to podcast or record video or anything from there, but if I'm honest with myself, that's not where a majority of my work happens anyways. Like that's the stuff people see is the podcast, the videos, but a lot of it is like just writing. I can do that from anywhere. So for the last week or so, I've been grabbing my laptop, going downtown and working from there for a couple of hours. Even did that today before I came home to record the podcast. And I am much more productive that way. So thanks, Woody.
Good job. 2 more and we'll get to themes, because I feel like that's kind of where I'm wanting to get here. But the first of those 2 is Einstein. I feel like I couldn't go through this without bringing up Einstein. And you've all seen the pictures of him, like crazy hair and such. And it sounds like, from reading this short snippet about Einstein, is he was disheveled like that so that he didn't have to take the time to trim and go do haircuts regularly. Like if he was just shaggy haired, he didn't have to waste his time on haircuts. There's probably something to that. Just maintain long hair. You can go months between haircuts.
Who needs personal hygiene anyways?
It's unnecessary. Last one here, Stephen King. Now, I've read his book On Writing. It's the title of the book, On Writing. And some of this comes from that book that Mason Currey puts in this one. But Stephen King writes to a quota of 2,000 words a day.
That's a lot.
You've heard people talk about the 1,000 words a day or 500 words a day, but he writes to 2,000 words a day. And that's how he knows when he's done. He has the time when he starts, and he goes until he hits 2,000 words, and then he can be done for the day. So just kind of an interesting way to do it instead of the time-bound piece.
Yeah, I don't like either of those, to be honest, the time-bound or the specific number. I've been driven by the number, the writing goals in the past, and I can't say that it's helped me produce on a more regular basis any more than having deadlines for things that I publish without any sort of parameters around what they're going to be are. I also feel a enormous amount of pressure when I look at those numbers. Like, I have all these words to go, even if it's only 1,000 words a day. And when I get rolling, I can crank out 1,000 words in 20 minutes. But still, just looking at that and be like, oh, there's so much more I have to do. I just don't like it. I can't work that way. Which kind of leads, by the way, to one more point here from Anne Rice. I thought this was maybe a really profound quote, and I think it leads into the next section maybe with the themes. We can talk more about Stephen King, though, if you want.
Good.
But Anne Rice said that the most important thing has been the ability to change routines. So a lot of these routines are shared, and they're kind of snippets in time, like this is what this person did. And some of them, like this is what they did until the day they died. Like they make a point to call that out. But some of them change their routines quite a bit. And I feel like that's healthy. I have noticed that I have done that over the last several years. Some of it maybe was encouraged by a global pandemic, but even without that, reading this book, I left with the idea that this is something that's natural. Like you do something for a while, a certain way, and then eventually you have to find a new way to do things in order to keep it fresh.
I think it's a really good point, and it's something that I think people tend to overlook is that, you can change your routines over time, and that's okay. And when you find yourself not actually producing what you want to produce, like changing your routines is actually the exact same. Like that's the thing that you need to do. Like break the ritual if you're not achieving what you want to achieve. And that's brought out in a handful of these stories. Like they would sometimes talk about how some of their kids would remember things differently. Like most of the kids remembered that dad was always locked in his room and you weren't allowed to go in. And then a different kid would say, no, actually that's not true. Mom was allowed to go in there. Like that would come up. But if you pay attention to the timing of when those two stories came out, they're both right. Like it used to be one way and then dad changed and it was a different way. Like
sure,
those routines can morph over time. So yes, good point.
I have an action item associated with that specifically.
Okay.
Towards the end, there was somebody, George's Simonin. I'm probably pronouncing that last name wrong. I had not heard of this person before, but they had a do not disturb sign that they would put on the outside of their door when they didn't want to be interrupted. And I was like, that's genius. So I ordered from Amazon right before we recorded this 2-sided do not disturb sign, which I will put in the chat here. Really simple. Just one side says, welcome, please knock. The other side, big red X, please do not disturb. And I can't even tell you how many times I have had the door closed, which has traditionally been the indication, do not disturb me. And I get knocks on the door anyways. I've got the LED hue light outside my door. I have the button on the Stream Deck to turn it red when I'm recording. I will still get knocks on the door. And every time it happens, I'm like, oh! So I'm adding another layer of defense for my deep focus modes.
Nice. Yeah, I have a currently recording sign on the door. As you can tell, the guys are paying attention to. And it's on the door currently. And all I've ever asked them to do is like, just don't bang on the walls and stuff right next to this room when that's out there. It's like, that's all I'm asking. And they chose to completely ignore it today. So not much I can do about it there. But yes, I hear you. And that's actually one of the themes here is that it seems like not all, but a number of the artists here in this book have rules around when people are allowed to interrupt them and what are their designated work times and what are the rules of engagement at which you're able to step into their creative zone and interrupt them. So it seems like those rules and those patterns are pretty common amongst these folks.
Yeah, so what were some of the patterns that you noticed or that you liked maybe? You know, maybe some of these you're already doing them. Like one thing that popped up a lot that I noticed was people tended to go for walks, and I know you go for your walks in the morning and in the evening.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, that's a lot of my designated leave me alone time has disappeared. You know, the only catch to that is the evening walks piece. But the morning thing's probably not going to pick up until we actually move into the house. So I suspect that that's going to be a pickup thing at that point. But yeah, I mean, those are probably the only times that I really have. I'm not truly able to say you can't interrupt me and you can't step in at my day job, which is where I'm at. I wish there was some way for me to do that, but the only other way that I can come up with that we could do recordings like this and have that separation is to pay to rent a place, or I don't even know what, do it in the evenings or on weekends, and it's painful for both of us to do that. So I'm not sure what that would be, but the nature of my work doesn't really allow that in the designated times piece and having those rules of engagement. So I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to do anything with that one, but there's a lot of them that are fascinating and I wish I could do. And I'm like, hey, you know, if I could control absolutely everything about my work, yeah, I would do that. And I wondered if that was part of it. It's like the people who are able to be an artist and do these things are ones who can control the entirety of that schedule. And it seems like people would tend to control it to the point where you're not allowed to interrupt me unless X, Y, and Z. So
yeah,
those were the rules that they would set up if they were able to set them up. But if you're not, I'm not sure what you do with that.
And if you do set up rules and people ignore them, then you need to get one of these rooms that I just shared in the the chat for you.
What is this, room.com?
Yeah, it's like a little call booth which is soundproofed.
So I need to get one of these and keep it as my own.
Yep.
Nice.
It's not going to help you with the internet speed at the new place, but
not at all.
No.
I do know, like, if I could get the internet thing figured out, like, I could build an entire room that was soundproof off somewhere else. Like, I could totally do that, but internet's questionable.
I share this partly because it's appropriate for today, but also I think the larger point here is in designing your environment to facilitate the focused work, which is what a lot of these creatives were doing. And there's lots of things that can cause you distractions. There's self-imposed distractions by you not turning off notifications on your devices. There's people drilling holes in the wall next to you. There's people actually entering your space when you're supposed to be doing something else. And I think the big takeaway from this book is to consider your own routines and what sort of creative work is valuable for you. And what are the things that you can do to facilitate that work? This room, this is like a thing that you assemble yourself. It's got vents at the top and it's got this little bench that you sit on. And it's, I actually know someone who has one of these and it's pretty soundproof. They put it in their office because they would always have people who would need to take a call and they don't want to, do it in the open space where it's bothering everybody else. So they hop into this little room cube thing, which looks really ridiculous because it's not very tall. It's probably like 5 feet tall. You got to like duck to get in it. But for some people, $4,500 or whatever it is for the cheap one of those to put that in your house and block out all the distractions, that's a deal.
Yes. Or you can go all the way to the top. I was looking at the top one is $15,500, so $16,000.
Yeah, they make bigger ones. They make focus rooms, bunch of different versions. It started off as just that little closet cabinet thing, though, where you could pop in and take calls. So it's got a nice light, gray background, little desk where you can put your laptop. and they are soundproof. Like when you're in there, you don't hear anybody on the outside. They don't hear you, which is kind of the whole goal. They're ventilated so it doesn't get to be 1,000 degrees in there while you're taking your call. And I love creative solutions like that because my natural inclination when I need to take a call at the co-working space is I look for an open office. I can go in and close the door, or I'll go in the conference room and close the door, which they have a stat on that website, like 46% of conference room use is by a single person. It's because no one's thought creatively about solving this problem. And if real estate is how much square footage you have in your space is the thing that's of most importance, then throw some money at the problem and get one of these. There are a lot of other people who throw a lot more money at problems thinking that fancy technology is going to solve it. And it's not. The newest Mac Pro, the biggest display, the fanciest keyboard, right? Like these are all potential solutions to a symptom. And if you can identify the real problem, then and you can get rid of it, it's a worthwhile investment, especially if you view the creative work that you do as the most important use of your available time.
Yeah, I could see it. I just think that's a pricey way to do it. Now, I say that, and yet I know, and I have to, like, this is where it gets hard for me to like keep boundaries, but I know that here at the church we have an interest in having like a video recording booth of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
So we've looked at building something that has a lot of sound deadening and video lighting and stuff that's set up in it that's made for that sort of thing, but it would have to block out like all the sounds because the building is getting more and more busy over time. And this room is actually where we've talked about building that. It's like, okay, if I do that, so how do I use that for my podcasting and my streaming and stuff? Like, how do I use it for that? So I have to like try to keep those separate.
The other piece of this is that you're way more handy than I am. So if you got your hands on the plans for this sort of thing, I'm sure you could build it yourself.
Oh yeah,
maybe you don't even need the plans.
I could build it way cheaper than what they're doing, I'm sure. So
yeah, this is a solution for a nerd who doesn't know how to swing a hammer, like me.
That's fair. That's fair. I just did a whole bunch of sound deadening in the ceiling of our kitchen and dining room, so that way, you know, if we get up and want to bang pans and pots around in the morning, we won't wake people up. So I have a whole system that I put in our ceiling there, which we were talking earlier is drywalled today. So anyway, house stuff. I'm not going to go there today. So some more of these themes. One of these, which I think you and I would tend to lean towards. Now, granted, I haven't been writing in quite some time, so keep that in mind here. But it seems like a lot of folks write first thing in the morning.
Yes.
And there are obviously, you know, these are themes. These are not hard rules, of course. There are definitely people who are starting their writing routine at midnight. I can't fathom that. That would make, like, I would have migraines for a week if I did that 2 days in a row. But people tend to write first thing in the morning. That seemed to be a theme that I noticed. But whenever I've done writing on a regular basis, the mornings are when I need to do that. Otherwise, it's gone and I can't focus on it. When do you do your writing? I know you do a ton of this, but when do you actually do that?
Good question. I think I write in the morning primarily, although not everything I do revolves around writing like you would traditionally think of writing. For example, a lot of the screencast workflow videos that I create, I don't have a script for those. And also, my voice doesn't wake up until about 11 a.m. If I record before 11 a.m., I sound like Barry Manilow.
Nice.
And some people have told me, like, hey, your voice sounds really good today. What was different? Oh, I had to record before 11.
So you have to wait till your voice warms up and doesn't sound as good? Is that what you're telling me?
I have to wait till my voice warms up because I personally don't think it sounds better when it's lower, but also it's just a lot more taxing. I don't have as much control, etc. So I know that the majority of my deep work is actual audio or video creation. There's an audio component involved to it. And so that deep work that I would typically want to do at the beginning of the day, I can't. So I do the outlining and a lot of the prep and stuff like that, yes, in the morning. But essentially what I've done is I have learned to utilize these pockets of time when I have them. That's where time blocking is really valuable for me. Is yes, in a perfect world where I had complete control over every hour of my day, I would be doing all this stuff at the beginning. But I don't all the time. And if I have our weekly meeting for the Blanc media team from 10 to 12 on Wednesday, I know that with some of the meeting prep I have to do, I'm not going to get a whole bunch of writing done before that meeting, but I've got 3 hours after that meeting, and I seem to not have a whole lot of trouble just shifting that till later in the day. Maybe that's weird, or maybe I'm just not paying close enough attention to realize that it is actually a lot harder for me later in the day. But my gut feeling is that the time doesn't really bother me so much.
There's one other theme that's really close to this one, and that's to work until lunch, and then they take the afternoons off entirely. This one I specifically pointed out because I noticed once I picked up on like 2 or 3 of these happening, I started to realize like a lot. Whenever their time schedule for the day is mentioned, there's a lot of times when people are done by 1 o'clock, by lunch, by 11, or they start at 10 a.m. and they go till 2 or 3 o'clock and then they're done. Like it's this 4 or 5 hour period, generally a 4 and a half hour period that a lot of these artists are working. One of which, I'm drawing a blank on her name, was like shooting to get a 30-minute writing slot in every day. And that was her one and only goal. It's like, not sure when it's going to happen, but at some point today, I need to write for 30 minutes. And like, that's how she wrote her books. And something about that time span, that 4-hour time span, it struck a chord with me because I know we've talked about like overwork, being too busy, 8-hour days don't work. Like this theme is one that we have brought up regularly on Bookworm. So to see it kind of come out in the artist's schedule over hundreds of years is interesting. It's like,
Yep.
Maybe they figured something out, and maybe this whole knowledge work thing fits the whole artist's mindset. May not be considered art, quote unquote, in today's world, but it requires the same type of mind processing, and thus leads us to a point where working 8 hours a day actually doesn't pan out, and you actually have to shorten that. That's all like theories and tying dots together and stuff that I'm still processing on, but wanted to share because I thought it was fascinating.
If I was writing this book, in addition to all the research and the interviews and the collection of the little snippets and things, which Mason Currey did a great job of, I would be creating a spreadsheet with things like what time did they start? What time did they stop? Did they take a nap? How many hours did they sleep? Etc. And I would average all that stuff out, and I would break it into sections. So I would have a section for the writers. I would have a section for the artists. I would have a section for the directors. And I would have the averages for the average writer works this many hours, sleeps this many hours, starts at this time, ends at this time, all that kind of stuff. Because I feel like those trends are really interesting, and there's nothing that speaks to that in this book. I understand that's not really the point behind the book, but that's the piece that I wish was there.
Yeah, and that's partly why I wanted to pull out themes, because to me those are the fascinating pieces. Like, yes, we can talk about, Kierkegaard and his weird coffee tendency and how Mozart was all over the place and Skinner had his schedules and patterns and such, but like those are fun little snippets, and it's partly why I wanted to start with those. But To me, the themes are where the meat of all this is, and it's just not there. And like, it's not spelled out. Curry didn't spell it out for us. You have to pull that together on your own, which is fine, just not my preference. Like, I feel like the trends is where some of the value is from a how do I improve me stance. Now, if you want this as just this is a cool way to see what people did, yeah, this is absolutely the right way to do it, which is probably his intent, but we're always trying to figure out what to do with it and how do I take steps with it. So I think we maybe have that tendency as well.
I think when you read through it the first time, the big takeaways are to look at the routines, and if anything in there stands out to you, try it for yourself. Just as a historical example of at least one other person who has done this successfully. So maybe you get a bunch of ideas for little experiments that you want you want to do on yourself and see if they improve your creative routines at all. But reading through it the second time, yeah, I definitely wish there was some trends or some big takeaways. I did not notice the desire to see that stuff after the first one. I remember after reading through it the first time, I was just like, there's a lot of really interesting stuff in there. There's a lot of really crazy people. And a lot of this stuff, I was just, I'm not going to do that. But some of it, I jotted down like, oh, that's an interesting idea. I think I'll try that. I walk away with this one with a couple different takeaways of things I want to try. But I also now, having read it the second time, do wish that some of the big picture stuff was there. I think in terms of improving your own routine, though, it's not that important. Maybe that's just the way my brain works. Maybe you're different and you want to see the averages and stuff like that, or what was the most popular piece of the morning routine for the most prolific writers. Like you teased out the writing goals and stuff, things like that. I don't know. If I were to look at that and someone were telling me you really need to track your writing goals, I think my initial response would be like, oh yeah, make me.
Try me on that. But you say that, and yet, you know, another one of these themes is that it seemed like those who had a very strict writing schedule, writers specifically, like they would have an 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. time slot, but if they did it at 8 a.m. every single day, they would report thousands of words written every day. And it seemed like that number was 3,000 plus. A couple of them were talking about 6,000 plus every single day. That's a lot.
That is a lot.
If you know that, like, that means that in today's terms of like books and stuff, they're writing an entire book about every week.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, Joe Bulig. What comes first, the writing time or the number of words?
No idea.
Goals or habits?
I would say in this particular case, I think what's happening is they're putting together the schedules and they're holding to that. And because of that, now I also want to point out, and this is, I kind of talked about this earlier, like people would work in the morning and then not in the afternoon. That theme combined with the strict schedule, because those who were doing that routine generally had the strict schedules, they would generally have reading time or like either before or after that writing, or they would go on walks. They would do some form of manual labor. It was always something that didn't involve writing and it didn't involve like a day job type work. Like there was always something that they did that was kind of like a letting your mind wander mode. And as a result of that, it would, I think, give them some of the creativity that they needed in order to write that many words. So I think there's some form of a combination of those things going on.
Sure. I think if you look at individual people, you can find people like Stephen King who are writing to a goal, 2,000 words every single day. Who cares how long it takes? I'm just going to get to that number. I wish I could go back and talk to a lot of these people. There's a lot of unanswered questions from these interviews, I feel. But if I were to wager a guess, I would say that the majority of the prolific writers who did not burn out probably focused on the time. And then once they got there, they just wrote, and they did that enough that the results took care of themselves. And so after a little while, they started to realize, I don't need to spend 12 hours per day writing. I can be done by noon if I get up at 6 a.m. Again, I understand that's a very general statement and there's no data to support it. I wish there was. I feel like there could have been.
Yeah, and you can transpose this with another side of this piece, because there are also people who had trouble sleeping. Like, that's another theme that seemed to come up. Like, people who were up at 1 a.m. and would work for an hour and a half at night, in the middle of the night. Who was it? Frank Lloyd Wright would be up from, was it 4 to 7 or something along those lines, and would do all of his design work at that point, would go back to bed for about an hour and get up at 8, but no one realized he was up for that 3-hour period, so they didn't even know he was working on designs at that time. It's like, when do you actually do your work? You're on phone calls and in meetings all day long. You don't actually do any of your architecture design work. Like, oh yeah, I do. I 3 hours every day. You just
That guy was crazy.
So the whole working in the middle of the night thing and having trouble sleeping, like that theme is certainly in this book as well, and it is one I want to avoid at all costs.
Another theme related to Frank Lloyd Wright specifically is the impending deadlines.
Yes.
I remember that one specifically. He had a project where he had to make some models or something, and he didn't start working on it until the client called him 2 hours before the meeting to say, I'm getting in the car and I'm on my way. And the way that interview or that section was written, it made it seem to me as the reader that to Frank Lloyd Wright, this was no big deal. This was just the kick in the pants he needed to actually do the work. And I remember reading that and thinking to myself, I would be so miserable. I would be so stressed out by just being forced to crank stuff out right before a deadline. For context, I mentioned the Relay FM Balderdash thing that was recorded yesterday. Well, I wasn't part of the original team. There was a odd number of hosts, and I was the backup, basically. And so we recorded it Sunday afternoon, 2 p.m. my time. I found out 5 or 6 p.m. Saturday, the day before, hey, we need you. So what did I do? I watched the video from the first one they recorded. I downloaded every incomparable episode where they played this low definition game that it was based off of. And I went and picked up Balderdash from my parents' house so I could play a couple of rounds at home. I was practicing basically every minute I had before that for something that was really just very chill, very fun. But of course, my mind is like, oh, you're going to make a fool of yourself, because I understand the basic premise of the game. I've never really been that good at it. I still don't think I'm very good at thinking on my feet. So I was super, super nervous about it. And this is a totally...
It's a game.
It's a game. It's a game as part of a fundraiser to help sick kids. Like, there is no pressure associated with this at all. And yet that's where my brain goes. So hearing Frank Lloyd Wright not even thinking about this project until 2 hours before he's going to meet with a client, if I was in that situation, I would be completely useless. You'd have to scoop me up from a puddle on the floor.
But just to point it out, he had thought about it. Like, that was their point, is like he was notorious for processing and thinking things through in their entirety in his own mind, but not externalizing it in any way until he absolutely had to. Like, that was the problem. It's like he just didn't communicate what he had been thinking through and getting ahead of the game. He just waited until the last minute.
Sure. I guess. Yeah. That sounds stressful. I forget a lot of stuff.
Oh, I'm not saying it's not stressful. I'm just saying that's what he did. Oh, fun
I feel
times.
there had to have been at least one point where his memory or brain wouldn't have functioned the way that he would have wanted it to, and he makes a fool of himself with a potential client. Maybe he doesn't care because he's so good at what he does that there's a bunch of other people just waiting to work with him. But I don't know. That's the people pleaser in me, I guess, where I wouldn't want to I wouldn't want to let anybody down.
Well, where the place where that falls down is if he's got two or more deadlines that line up with each other.
Sure.
Because if he's got two on the same day and they call and say, "Hey, I'm going to be there in 2 hours," and he goes and busts it out, but in the middle of working on that one, somebody else does the same thing and they're going to be there at roughly the same time. Guess what? You got a problem. You actually aren't capable of hitting both of those. But
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe he just shortcuts one and does the other. I don't know.
Does not sound appealing to me at all.
No, not at all. And I'm with you on that one. Not something I want to replicate.
One of the themes that I wrote down was lots of naps,
Lots of people took their naps.
which is intriguing. I feel like I have heard the virtues of the nap extolled from many people for a very long time, and I have always resisted it. But maybe there's something there. I do recognize, to your point, you mentioned the trends and kind of this 4 hours of work idea that we've heard more recently as it pertains to knowledge work. Maybe if you took a nap, you could increase that. I don't know. I still don't like the idea of interrupting my day to, to take a nap, but maybe that would be a way to get more creative output throughout the course of a 24-hour day.
Though it did seem like the folks who took a nap were ones who were definitely like up late, up early, like they were shortcutting their night on top of that. So, because I know like I had a period where I took naps regularly, and it seemed like whenever I was doing that, sleeping at night became trickier. So I would end up going to bed later. So I was getting roughly the same amount of sleep. I just was splitting it up between night and day. So I don't know. I've since just dropped the nap thing. It like doesn't exist anymore. But don't know. You can do naps if you want.
Well, the idea of naps or walks or some sort of reset in the middle of the day, I think, is an interesting one. And I think there is some format of that which I can use strategically to get better consistent output. Maybe not increase necessarily the number of hours that I'm working, but get more out of the hours that I'm working by mode switching, not just changing places to do work like I talked about earlier, but actually stopping the work to give myself more space just to think, especially since so much of my work is creative. I don't know. It's got me thinking about how I can incorporate some of that into my daily routine.
It's valid. I've been getting plenty of manual labor time in lately to make up for it. So that's what I've been doing.
One thing I noticed with that, by the way, is if I do get in the right scenario for a walk, I can be actually very creative, even when I'm not at my keyboard. I remember one of the reasons that I got this co-working space downtown is that it is not that far from this really beautiful trail, which is right by the river. And so I like to walk that trail whenever I am downtown. I remember last fall, maybe spring. I don't remember the exact time frame. When we were working on the time tracking course for the Sweet Setup, I went for a walk on that trail and just walked it for like an hour and a half, 2 hours one day, and dictated all of the scripts for that course while I was on the walk, which I had before that point never thought that I could write, quote unquote, while I was on a walk. Writing happens when you're at your computer with a clicky keyboard. But that just showed me that that doesn't have to be the case. And I can't do that every time, but when I know that I have something specific that I'm just needing to noodle on, the walks I feel can be a very powerful piece to the creative process. And maybe I find when I get back from my walk where I wrote the scripts for the course, I'm exhausted. Then maybe that's the time to take a nap and then get up and try to do something instead of, okay, now I'm going to immediately launch into the next task. I don't know. There's lots of different variables at work here, but I am thinking through how all these pieces fit together in the best way for me.
That's actually what prompted me to start doing my evening walks. It's because I've been doing so much work on the house and there's so many problems that I'm not like, it's a puzzle. Like I have to put so many different pieces together and solve so many different problems simultaneously that I needed the space to come up with solutions. And taking that 15, 20 minutes in the evening to go for that walk was exactly what solved a lot of that for me. So I was just like, I gotta keep doing this because it fixes so many things and helps me get the clarity that I need in so many ways. So yes, headspace. Got any action items, Mike? Unless there's something else you want to cover here.
No, I'm good. Action items, I do have a couple. One of the things that I've been thinking about as I think through all of these different routines was how much focus and care was placed on making sure that the routine was protected, because they recognized that the routine was the thing that allowed them to do their creative work, whether it was their full-time gig or whether it was just trying to find a little bit of time like Mozart on the side for the thing that we now know him for. And I recognize that my life is kind of complicated, which is what it is. Lots of different hats that I wear. Elder at my church, 5 kids, middle school, assistant soccer coach, yada, yada, yada. But maybe I can simplify in some way. I remember going through a process like this when the pandemic started and asking myself, what do we really need to do? It wasn't all the things that we thought it was. We found new ways to do things like piano lessons. And I feel like I need to take a look at things again and just ask, what is really hitting the mark? And what can I get rid of simply so that I have a little bit more margin in order to protect the creative routine? I don't think I'm on the verge of burnout or anything like that, but I do want to take some preventative measures. So make my life simpler is the short version of that action item. Another one I have is go for walks. I used to do this. I mentioned I wrote the scripts for the time tracking course while on a walk, but I still find this absent in my daily routine, my daily planning with my time blocking. It's sort of something that I just in the moment am inspired and I'll go do the thing. And I want to start building it in more regularly. I want to have something on my time blocked plan of go for a walk. That's how formal I want it to become, because I feel it's not going to become consistent unless I do that. We've talked about the value of these walks how many times on Bookworm. And every time I'm like, yeah, every time I go for a walk, I get these ideas. And then I get busy and I don't go for walks, so I don't get the ideas.
And then you're upset because you're not coming up with the ideas that you need to solve the project at work. But
well,
at least that's what I do.
That's what I don't feel I'm lacking in the ideas department. So maybe that's a little bit of the reason why I don't do it, because I feel I can't handle more. I don't know. And then the other one, which is already complete, is to get the Do Not Disturb sign. It's been ordered. It will be here on Wednesday. And that's going on my studio door.
Yeah, I would say for action items on my side, I really have one, and it's been an ongoing action item, and I'm bringing it up again here, but in a slightly different way. But this has prompted me to just think through what I want my daily ritual to look like, what that time schedule process looks like, between hiring an assistant underneath of me here at church to handle like evenings and weekends and such, and having the new house which has the trails and outdoor space right on the same property. Like between those two, I'm transitioning here in the next month into a place where I can basically rewrite what that daily flow looks like. And that was what I really wanted out of this, was just kind of ideas, what works, what doesn't work, what do I like, what do I not like, who do I think is crazy, who do I think is genius. Like that whole concept is what I was really after with this, and I feel like it really helped me at least try to put some of those pieces together. And it's one that I'm not sure I'm going to formalize it into any form of like a schedule like Ben Franklin did, but I think just processing that and at least having that conversation with my wife about here's what I'm thinking as far as what our daily routine looks like. This is our chance to edit that, I suppose. You know, whenever you're making a big transition, that's the time to edit your habits and routines. So I'm dead center of that process right now. So that was what I was wanting to work through. And that's kind of the big overarching action item that comes out of this. But I knew that's what I was going to get before I walked into this too. So take that for what it's worth. I guess that brings us to style and rating. And I suppose this is my book. So as far as the style goes here, Mason Currey did, I think, a great job of showing us a little tidbit or snippet about each of these artists and helping us to see maybe an area we didn't have any idea pertain to that particular person. Looking at you, Kierkegaard, and seeing these things that I never knew about and seeing the stories that have come out of that. And Mason did a good job of, if there was a autobiography or someone who wrote about the person, like he would pull snippets from those directly instead of trying to pass them off as his own or rewriting them. I feel like that has actually helped in this quite a bit because you could hear it from the person who had one-on-one contact with this person, with this artist, or from the artist themselves. So I feel like that was a really good way to do that. I really, really wish he did some form of summarization. Come on, give me a chart, give me a something. I don't know what it is, but I feel like this is just begging to have some kind of a data flow, something. Maybe that's the data analyst in me coming out. I think, you kind of mentioned it as well, but I really wanted something like that. I understand that it's not going to be complete and you're not going to have the same data points for every single person, but at least try, please. So I'm hoping that would maybe be a supplementary thing at some point, but it's just not in this. And I feel like that's a fairly big, obvious miss here. So as far as rating goes, I'm going to put it at a 4.0 because I feel like there was an opportunity and it needed to be filled and it wasn't. And there's also a number of these that are so short that I had a hard time figuring out who the person was in some cases, because I pulled out, like the ones that we ran through, those are all folks that I at least know and have some background on, and I felt comfortable talking about them because I know about, Mozart's compositions. Like I know some of those things in some of the books that Stephen King has written. Like I know those people, but there's a lot of names in this book. I have no idea who they are. Maybe you know all of them, but I had a lot of them in here that name was brand new to me. I'd never seen that name before. And it's kind of hard for me to get my head around who that person is to understand what that work was. There were a couple of them, like, yeah, the prolific, famed writer, whatever your name is, apparently not that famous. I don't know who you are. So I'm sorry, but I don't know who you are. Anyway, I wish there was maybe some kind of a bio on these that would just tell us like a 2 or 3 sentence thing of what they're famous for in some form. So to me, that was a bit of a miss. It was good that he put the dates, like their birth date and, what their lifespan was and such. So that helped me out quite a bit. So anyway, all that to say, I really enjoyed it. I think you should read it, but I still think it's a 4.0. That's where I put it.
All right. Well, I think I disagree a little bit with the biography section because if you added those, this book is twice as long, probably.
It is. Yep, it is. Maybe there's a different way to do it. I don't know.
Yeah. The other thing that I wish this book had was some other more contemporary people. I guess what I really want is Tim Ferriss's interviews summarized by Mason Currey. If that makes any sense. So I think there's a lot of value to be gotten from this book. I think it can inspire some really cool stuff in regards to your daily routine. I don't think it's perfect. And I was a little bit more disappointed with it the second time that we read it than I was the first time. The first time I remember reading through this and I just cranked through it because it was a really enjoyable read, and every chapter, every section for every new person does not require any previous context because it's just a glance inside of their life. I do wish there was some way to kind of tease out the common themes between all of these people that Mason Currey has done these little snippets on, but I don't fault him for not including it in this particular book. I did a quick search for what other sorts of things Mason Currey has written, and it looks like there's different versions of this in other languages, and then there's daily rituals of women at work. I feel like this whole idea has a lot of room to be expanded, and I hope that it gets there. I'm not extremely optimistic that it will.
At least it looks like he's exploring that.
Yep. What I would love to see, though, because what you get from reading this book is sort of the focus on the details and not just condensing it down into these are the 10 things that you must do if you want to be successful. When most people hear of daily rituals or routines or habits, that's what they think of, is those clickbaity titles. Like, this is what Steve Jobs, Oprah Winfrey, Mark Zuckerberg, and all other super successful people do to start their day. That sort of thing makes me want to puke. This is definitely not that. This is a very good book with a lot of things that you can, it's really well written. It's very interesting. It does get a little bit old towards the end. I shouldn't say old. It feels like there's a lot of repetition in the types of things that he's describing in the routines towards the end. Like I said, a lot of it is, maybe it's stuff I missed, but a lot of it felt like this person got up at this time and went to bed at this time. And in between they did a couple of things, but that's kind of where the focus was. Whereas at the beginning, you hear about Kierkegaard's coffee, you hear about Benjamin Franklin's time blocking, and I understand you're not going to find those little snippets from everybody, but it would have been cool to have some more standout stuff like that in the back. I also think it could have been cool to break it down by sections. So if you're picking this book up as an artist, you can go straight to the section that includes the artists. And you can kind of do that. There is a table of contents at the beginning, and then also an index in the back where you can find like the specific people and read those. But I think breaking them down by sections could have been cool. And you could also summarize, like, these are the challenges that artists face. These are the challenges that choreographers faced, etc. And this is some of the big takeaways, what they did to overcome those. But overall, I really enjoyed this book, and I would recommend it to just about anybody. I'm going to rate it at 4.5. I really don't have anything to say against it per se. Just having read it a second time, I can see where there's some natural extensions of some of these ideas. And it did get a little bit long for me this second time through.
Sounds valid. All right. I'm good with putting it on the shelf, Mike. What's next?
Next is The Extended Mind by Annie Paul, which is a big book. So if you have not started it, do so immediately.
Aye, Captain. I feel like I saw this on some of the Amazon deals, and it seems like it's a very popular book, is what it seemed like.
Yeah, it looked like it was one of Amazon's picks for the best books of this year, if I'm remembering correctly. I don't have it up in front of me now. I heard about it from David Sparks. he had recommended it, and I love this whole idea of neuroplasticity, and the title implying the extended mind, thinking beyond your logical, formulaic, this is how I make decisions sort of a thing. I feel like there's going to be a lot of insights in this into just how to interpret some of the stuff that you feel. Maybe like you have a gut feeling, I don't really trust this person, but you don't know why. And then later on you realize, oh, it's because they're a lying cheat. And it's kind of intrinsically, you knew that. You don't know how you knew it, but you knew that. Like that's the kind of thing I'm expecting from this book. There's lots of other books on this topic that I'm fascinated by. I've got one on my shelf back here, Brain Rules and stuff like that. So I have these types of books, but I haven't really studied this a whole lot. And just based off of the recommendations, I feel like this maybe is a great place to start.
Yeah, no, sounds good. I know. Yeah, I'm excited about it. I think it'll be good for sure. After that, have you looked at the list here already? I assume you have.
Yes, I am very excited.
This is one you're going to have to pre-order if you want to get it in time, and it'll be maybe a little tight for us timing-wise, but Courage is Calling by Ryan Holiday. And this is the first book in a 4-book series that he's starting based on these four virtues that he wants to cover. The first of which is courage. The second is temperance. The third is justice. And the fourth is wisdom. But he's starting with courage. And he's doing that because what he's saying is that the beginning of a lot of religions and spiritual practices and philosophies all grapple with fear. And having courage to overcome that fear is where a lot of life struggles and overcoming those struggles starts. So anyway, we've always enjoyed Ryan Holiday's books, and
yes, we have.
Did not want this one to slip through our fingers. So knowing that the timing was going to work out to where it was going to be my pick right after it comes out, it's like, we have to do this. Like, I just think we have to. It's required.
Well, truth be told, I wanted to pick this one for mine, but it wasn't going to come out in time, so I'm glad you did.
I got it. All right, I win. Yes, Courage is Calling by Ryan Holiday. We'll do that after The Extended Mind by Annie Paul. But what gap book do you have? Because Joe ain't going to do that for a while.
I do not have any gap books, although I just ordered a bunch of books. So maybe I'll get to one. No promises. One other comment on the Ryan Holiday stuff.
Yeah.
I feel like any time Ryan Holiday comes out with a book, we should automatically add it to the bookworm queue.
Pretty much.
Okay.
It's my vote. I could get on board with that. We got to get through his 4-part series here.
Yeah.
For sure. All right, that all said, I just want to thank those of you who are Bookworm Club members specifically. You guys are awesome. I know we talk a lot about Mike's MindNode files, which he didn't do for this one, but has tons and tons and tons of those on the Bookworm Club. And we're so grateful to you. And you definitely help us to keep trucking along and give us the motivation there. So if you're willing to join us and support the show, go to bookworm.fm/membership, and we'd love to have you on board that membership.
Yes, and just a quick shout out for people who are members and have noticed that I fell a little bit behind with the MindNode files. I apologize. They are all up to date now. So go check the member section and get you some of those mind map files. If you are reading along with us, pick up The Extended Mind by Annie Paul, and we will talk to you in a couple of weeks.